Yeah, so hey everybody, thanks very much for giving your time. I do appreciate it. Thanks to the organisers of this. It's a crazy scale event to do all online, so full credit to everybody involved in Teams Fest. We've got, I think, hard mute on attendees, but I've got two monitors, so I've got an eye on chat. Lee's going to help me with chat as well, so feel free to fire in feedback as we go or questions as we go. And if we get the timing right, there should be a little bit of time at the end as well. I'm in no desperate rush to jump off either. So this session is Microsoft Teams phone system keys to success. And we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things, but just to set the scene, it's really a more strategic session about what you need to be successful. So lots of insights from real world deployments, tips to ensure your success, connectivity options, architecture options. It's not a highly technical session. There's no PowerShell, there's no ports and protocols. So if you were looking for ports and protocols and stuff, probably not a session for you, but it is all about actually having a successful Microsoft Teams voice deployment, and lots of the keys are non-technical. There are some important technical ones, but there's some non-technical ones as well. Who am I? Tom Arbuthnot, a Principal Solutions Architect at Modality Systems. So Modality are a Microsoft collaboration specialist, grown up through the OCS Link Skype days, but in more recent years, more rounded in their 365 Office 365 space. But lots of experience in Teams, lots of experience in global voice projects. So plenty of lessons learned in the field. I blog, I speak, I get around. There's a really great community around Teams, so quite pleased to be a small part of that. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, big agenda. We're going to talk about Teams phone system, what it is, what it does, how the features work, all again high level, where they fit in the puzzle. A good amount of time on Psdn connectivity options. That's your big decision point when going Teams telephony. Do you go calling plans? Do you go direct routing? There are so many flavors of direct routing and options there. We'll talk about that a bit. Compliance call recording, a big factor that's unblocked a lot of our bigger customers. Devices, so you've got the old Skype phones, the 3-pips, you've got Teams phones, you've got SIP phones coming. We'll talk about that. Some basic tips around deployment, ongoing management, reporting, operations, that kind of thing. And rounding out kind of a bit of discussion about business goals. So actually that is the piece to stick around for. You need to have your business, I say business, could be organization obviously, but business tends to be the shorthand. But why are you even doing Teams telephony, and what's the point, what's the benefit, what's the cost saving, what's the productivity improvement? And we'll try and leave a little bit of time for questions afterwards as well. So intros, this audience probably know the basics of Team phone system, but just to recap, it's funny actually, I think in our world we often forget to cover the basics. Some people who use Teams all day every day have no idea that it can be a real phone system with a real phone number, and I can make and receive PSTN phone calls. The gaps I often find when we're talking to customers actually is that not everybody is as plugged in as this community is around the features and abilities, and they might just think of Teams as a chat product, or maybe more likely chat and meetings, and not even know it could be a soft phone, and especially not know that there are physical IP phones they can bang on guest desks that have PoE, that work independently of a PC, that can make and receive phone calls that are Teams phones. All your typical end user features, call park, voicemail, shared line appearance. We'll talk about the user features there. You can either bring your own PSTN carrier, techie term, but bring your own phone connectivity, your phone lines from your preferred provider, so your BT, AT&T, Level 3, Pure IP, anybody basically, or you can buy calling plans from Microsoft, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of both of those. Talk about licensing, but you can get it both at enterprise and small business. And I think that small business thing is massively underrated. There's really aggressive pricing for sub 300 seat, and that's a good opportunity. And it does the PBXy type centralized features like auto attendant call queues, common area phones, meeting room phones, that kind of thing. So that's the basics of it. In terms of what you need to turn it on, you need a license called phone system, essentially. So if you've got Teams and if you've got Office 365, you have to do very well to avoid Teams. So it's basically in every level. But in E5, you also get the phone system feature bundled, or in E3 or the equivalent A3 that you get it as an add-on. You'll also need Psdn connectivity, so calling plan or direct routing. And for that sub 300 users, there is a SKU, a license called Business Voice, and that bundles Psdn audio conferencing, phone system, and either calling plan or direct routing with a partner. And that is a really good offer for sub 300 seat. I think that market is really got a lot of potential in terms of good value for money to have a full phone system and conferencing for a set cost. So in terms of the user features, again, in 40 minutes, we're not going to go through feature for feature. The documentation's fairly good on this. You can get hold of a test license and play with this stuff. But your typical knowledge worker plus type features is how I would describe it. Some tips is just because the name is the same as your PBX name doesn't mean that the feature works exactly the same. So when you're going through thinking about switching from XYZ PBX to Teams, just bear in mind that there will be some user training because Teams Call Park might not work the same way as your existing Call Park worked, for example. So take a bit of time when you're looking at Teams telephony and make sure you're happy with how the feature works. Don't just assume busy on busy in Teams will work exactly the same as busy on busy in Avaya or Cisco, for example. More generally, features are very power user self-service motivated. So lots of old school PBXs, you could configure everything for the user centrally and on their behalf. Teams and generally Microsoft's philosophy is more empowering the users to set their settings. So bear that in mind as well. The feature's there, but it might require client-side setting, not necessarily centralized administration. And when you're looking at features and comparing to PBXs, odds are your PBX has more features. Like PBXs have been around for years and years and years. They have lots of features, but what do your users actually need? And what's the opportunity cost of losing an esoteric feature on the PBX versus the benefits of Microsoft Teams as telephony? That's the things to think about. But in terms of understanding user features, get hands-on, have a play with them would be my top tip. Service side features, we were just saying before the session, Craig did a good session on that covered some call queue and auto attendant configuration in way more detail, but you do have the PBX like features that you're going to replace here around call queues, so a greeting, music and routing to a group of people, auto attendant, the press 1 for sales, press 2 for accounts type stuff. And you can do those with either Microsoft numbers, so from Microsoft as a service, or you can route in your own numbers via direct routing. So again, those bases are covered. Do a quick comparison of how you use the PBX versus how you would use Teams and check you can line up, but those features are all in the box. So that's a whistle stop on features. I think Psdn connectivity is the big topic in Teams telephony. The features are the features, but in Psdn connectivity, you've got options. So first off, and really important to understand, Psdn conferencing, so the ability to dial in and dial out of a meeting, is always from Microsoft. There is one exception in GCC High and DoD. You can route your own numbers in for security reasons, but for everybody else in the world, you always buy your conferencing from Microsoft. So there's no way to route that through your own system like you would have done with Skype server. But for user phone numbers, you can either buy from Microsoft through what they call a calling plan, or you can use direct routing. And direct routing is bring your own SBC, bring your own carrier. You can do it globally, and there are lots of different architectural options to consider there. So we're going to go through what calling plans are and what direct routing is and compare and contrast them. So first off, calling plans. So Microsoft just bumped this number significantly. They're now up to 16 countries. There was a big gap in calling plans where they were 10 countries for quite a long while, up till end of 2018 when they added Canada, and they've just added 6 more. They also tease that there's more countries coming. They can't give a roadmap for countries because of tax and legal reasons, which is slightly annoying, but they are on the push again for country coverage. various plans you can see on the right slide there. MCO PSDN1, MCO PSDN2 are your typical ones. There are also 1 20-minute and 2 40-minute plans available to essentially enterprise agreement customers. If you're buying lots and lots of seats, those licenses tend to make more sense because they're less minutes per user. And what you'll notice is each license has a bundle of minutes. So 3,000 domestic, 1,200 international, PSDN1 for EU, or for the Europe one, it's 600 international. That is a very interesting model. It's kind of like a mobile type model. So let's break that down. What it means is not that an individual user has that number of minutes, but that the plans are bundled per country and per plan type. So from a Teams perspective, if you have 3 users on MCO PSDN2 domestic international in France, then those 3 users have a combined limit of 3,600 domestic minutes and 1,800 international minutes. So any one of them can go above their individual plan limit. It's treated as a bucket. And once you burst over that bucket by any one user, you then pay per minute for those users with a thing called communication credits, which essentially is a bucket of prepaid minutes. So bear recording plans, if you're mixing and matching plan types within a country, only the same plan types will align into a bucket. You can buy just a domestic plan and put international minutes on consumption, but there is no pay per minute option. So you have to buy at least one of the smaller tier buckets or plans per user, which is where the 120 and 240 licenses tend to cost in at smaller levels of customers, because larger number of seat count. So if you've got lots and lots of users, you're unlikely to on average use 1,200 minutes per user, so 240 or 120 might make more sense. Price wise, they're probably up there compared to direct routing. The benefit is you're going complete with Microsoft end-to-end, one contract, one provider, but commercially it tends to be, because direct routing is competitive between multiple vendors, it's slightly more aggressive, but that is an option you've got on the table, and it is increasing in terms of country coverage, and it's very easy to order and set up. Direct routing to compare. So direct routing is a funny marketing name for bring your own trunk or bring your own session border controller, but it's a technical ability, direct routing. So you can connect a certified session border controller to Microsoft, and you can connect that certified session border controller to a carrier. So that opens up a lot of architectural options. You can have your own physical session border controller in your own offices. You could have virtual session border controllers in the cloud. You could have a partner manage it. You could manage it yourself. You could have a carrier manage it. So when people say direct routing, it's important to understand which variant of direct routing do they mean. Benefits of direct routing are pretty easy. Global coverage, so calling plans only cover 16 countries. If you're big, if you have countries you need to cover outside those 16, direct routing is your option. It's a very competitive market, so there are lots of SBC vendors that are certified. There are lots of providers doing direct routing. Odds are your carrier or provider probably has either a direct offer or a partnership. So in terms of switching to Teams telephony, being able to keep your own carrier, keep your own numbers with the same carrier can be a nice thing to do. You can control your migration. So you control where the number routes. One day it routes to the PBX, next day it routes to Teams. That's under your control. You can do some more advanced stuff like media bypass, so sending your voice media for telephony directly to the SBC, meaning your PSDN voice from in the office doesn't have to go out onto the internet, although all your meeting content is going out to the internet, so like you need good connectivity either way, but it can be handy if you've got lots and lots of PSDN concurrency, you want to keep it on net. You can connect standard based SIP phones for resiliency or DR or just for connectivity purposes. You can connect analog via analog telephony adapters, so if you've got lift phones and special phones, alarms, you could leverage that session border controller to also connect those. Do location-based routing in countries where you need to prevent toll bypass for international calls. And I'll talk about it more in a second, but there is a survivable branch appliance option coming. So lots of good reasons to do direct routing. But as I say, there are many options. So you can have a literal physical, I can touch it, session border controller on site. You can have virtual SBCs that are dedicated to you, either on your site, on your Hyper-V or VMware cluster, or in a cloud service like Azure or AWS. But you can also have direct routing as a completely managed service. So many carriers and providers will have SBCs that they have configured to run direct routing, and they'll provide it as a per minute, per channel kind of service. From a management point of view, there is an overhead here. Those boxes need managing, patching, maintaining, logging, supporting, keeping up. It is telephony. So you can choose to manage it in-house. It's certainly a specific skill set, or you can have it managed by a Microsoft partner or a carrier. And you can mix and match all these options as appropriate for your business. So you can mix and match calling plans and direct routing on a per user basis. You could have some direct routing from a carrier for one country, and you could have direct routing on site for another country because you need local connectivity. So you don't have to make a global decision. You can choose on a case-by-case basis what you want to do. In terms of direct routing, from a techie point of view, we all get very excited because it's complex, it's technical, but you're outsourcing your telephony to a cloud service. So do you have a compelling reason to bring SBCs in-house? Do you need your own SBCs? I would always say, all things being even, look for a provider to provide that service for you, because you're outsourcing the brain of the PBX, so why wouldn't you outsource the SBC? There are some good sessions coming up later in the day that will maybe counter that argument in some ways. Consider your SBC vendor. There are lots of certified vendors. From a technical support point of view, from a manageability point of view, from a time in market understanding point of view, there's lots of good things to consider there. Just because you've got a vendor in play who supports teams. So for example, your Cisco's and your Avayas are starting to get supported. Do they support all the features? Because there's certification and then there's certification. So being certified in Teams direct routing doesn't necessarily mean you support things like local media bypass, for example. And every carrier and their mum is spinning up some kind of direct routing as a service at the moment. Just be careful out there. There's lots of people spinning them up, reselling them. There's no certification really from Microsoft for being a direct routing provider as such. So anybody can say they do direct routing, and lots of them say they're certified by virtue of having some certified SBCs in play. But just like anything, I mean, you could configure certified SBCs wrong, badly, unresilient, and they're still certified, they've just been configured wrong. So I'd recommend when you look for providers, look at their time in the Microsoft space in the market, look at their references. If you're technical, try and talk to someone technical on the customer side about architecture, availability, who they use, what their support model is, what their failover model is. Look if they've got any referenceability or relationship with Microsoft. Have they got Microsoft certified staff on the team? Who looks after those SBCs? Are they generic engineers, or do they get teams? Does their support team really get teams? Is an interesting question to ask. And yeah, just basically, I would say above all else, look for referenceability, because lots of people are coming into this space, but you need a specific set of skills to understand how to configure and scale those SBCs that are certified, how to keep up with the firmware, how to keep up with the Microsoft changes, that kind of thing. I teased this, survivable branch appliances. This was news out of Ignite. This is a pretty interesting one. So you will have the ability to have a local SBC on site that will carry on working should your internet connectivity / WAN connectivity / cloud go down. Now, obviously, you need to have some kind of local Psdn connectivity. So this box is no good if you do your SIP over the internet connection and the internet connection goes down, you're still toast. Having said that, there are interesting opportunities coming along around 4G and 5G, independent connectivity. Some people have dedicated circuits for their SIP connectivity. So there are options to split those dependencies. These are useful where a customer has a high availability requirement for telephony service. So Microsoft Office 365 is 99.9, and your internet circuit may not be, probably won't be 5 nines. So having some kind of resiliency on telephony can be a key feature for some customers. On the flip side, I would say with a business hat on, do you really need another box to maintain and patch? If your office goes down for everything on the internet but stays up for telephony, how useful is that for your workers? Like, great, I can get telephony calls, but I can't get my email or my Salesforce or my Dynamics or my line of business or my SharePoint, or the rest of Teams for that matter. It's just telephony. So great to tick a box for resiliency purposes, great for some business use cases. There are lots of SBCs out there that people want to upgrade, but when you're going to the cloud, I think it's a slightly different conversation. Compliance recording, keeping the pace up here, about halfway through. So this is a really big one. It unblocks lots and lots of customers who have an absolute legal requirement to record calls. I bring it up in a Teams telephony session because that tends to be where it comes up, but it is compliance session recording. So it does record meetings, it records peer-to-peer calls, it records Psdn calls. There are a lot of vendors that are certified. The list is on the screen, the links to their websites are on the screen. You can have it as a complete SaaS solution, you can have it dedicated to yourself on Azure, you can deploy it on physical servers, or there is some Azure connectivity required. So there are lots of options. Kind of the same rules apply here around choosing a vendor, like how long have they been in the space, what's their support model, what's their cost model, do you have a partner you're working with that has a vendor preference. There are also lots of differences around how they store the recordings, how they index them, how they use things like AI and ML and speech analysis and all sorts of things around what they do with the recordings. So worth having a look at what's in the market there. Most important, there's no client-side plugins, it's all service-side, it's all certified by Microsoft, so it will work on different endpoint types because it's all done service-side. That is one of the biggest unblockers for large customers, particularly FinServ, Pharma, like pro services. They all tend to have some kind of recording requirement for their users. And it also will obviously work remote because it's service-side, so all this working from home, we've seen a lot of FinServ customers accelerate this because they need compliance recording at home, work from home, and they've had things like IP phones that dual stream to a recorder, but they haven't got the IP phones at home. So that's a really nice feature. So moving on, phones and devices, much neglected topic. You obviously have the USB headset option, and that is a real diverse market of options, you know, over ear, on ear, in ear, Bluetooth, DECT, lots of different options. Always go for something certified. It means that Microsoft have done some testing around it being compatible. Things like the mute button will work consistently with Teams. The audio quality is up to a certain level. That's really important. Wired is your really easy option, like wireless of DECT, Bluetooth adds a variable. So people like wireless headsets, but they do add a variable. For example, in an office, if you go Bluetooth, you have to watch about overlapping signal and Bluetooth density. If you go DECT, you've got a really wide range, but again, you need to watch out for density there. So if you're going to go wireless, have a do a little bit of research on what you're going to go for. DECT is great. I would tend to go DECT, all things being even. It's slightly more expensive, but particularly with working from home, it's really nice because you get a really good range on it. Bluetooth can be nice because you can sync mobile and Teams time, or have one or the other, so you can give users one headset that works for both. And you can also have personal USB speakerphones, which lots of people are starting to like at home because they're kind of getting headset fatigue from being on the headset all day. Most importantly, you're now moving your telephony platform to Teams, so don't cheap out on the devices. Like, people are going to be using them a lot. Lots of projects I see them, they've previously bought hundreds of dollars worth of IP phones per user, and then they're like, oh, I can buy the lowest end headset. It's like, well, yeah, you can, but if they're going to be using it all day, every day, it's worth investing a little bit of money in that, I think. It makes for a much better user experience. Of course, we have Teams IP phones. Again, you'd be surprised people are not aware that this is a thing. Classic telephony device. The hardware comes from multiple certified vendors. The software is made by Microsoft as in the application. So user experience wise in the software, they're all pretty similar, if not the same. Hardware layouts are different. Vendor support is different, kind of the SLAs and returns models and level of warranty, all those are the variables you want to look at when you're looking at these devices. They're PoE devices, they update directly from the Teams service, they actually automatically update now. There are some cheaper IP phones from Teams coming, so lower end models with less fancy screens. There's also some USB form factor Teams phones coming as well, which look like a phone, but essentially have a USB cable and less brains in them. So some people like that form factor, but are happy to connect it to a PC. And there's also a new type of device called Teams Display, which is like a personal video unit. So kind of think like a Google Home with a screen or an Echo Show, but with Teams ability. So an interesting new form factor device there. But these are nice where people still like having an IP phone. They're nice from a resiliency point of view because they're fairly basic Android devices, so you don't have the laptop booting up, time delay at home, or you don't have the patching window, those kind of things. They're a device lots of people like. But all things being even, I would push for headsets where you can and phones where you require them. You also have interesting hybrid options now with some of these phones of connecting Bluetooth or DECT or wired headsets, so you can have an IP phone with a headset as well. Of course, if you had Skype for Business, you might well have a lot of IP phones knocking around. So if you've got what were called 3-pip IP phones, you can use them with Teams. Initially, that was going to be cut off on the 31st of July 2023, but now Microsoft have confirmed they will be supported beyond that. There's no date been given. They are limited functionality. They're not going to do everything a Teams IP phone can do. There's a link there to a list of features. Being incompatible with Teams E911 is a big factor to consider, but have a look at the feature list. You can absolutely reuse those devices. And last, on the kind of phones point of view, there is ability to support SIP phones coming. Details are very limited. Microsoft said Cisco, Yealink and Polycom are going to be on the list. Apparently there's going to be no additional license. Obviously TBC, talk to Microsoft. Likely that there's going to be some kind of approved list. This is how other vendors do this. So they have a list of devices they're happy to support. It's quite possible that this is how 3-pip phones are going to be supported for longer term, so flipping them to SIP mode. And what this will come into play in terms of your Teams telephony is if you've got hundreds or thousands of Cisco phones out there, it might ROI to reuse that hardware and connect them via SIP. But you want to be careful about what the features are, what the support model is. Do you need to manually configure them? When you put in the overhead of manually configuring them, the life of those phones, the support model, does it still ROI to have those phones? It'll be an interesting feature in 2021. So, deployment options. Kind of some tips. I'm not going to go through this step by step. Again, the documentation is very good on this stuff. But first off, know how your phone system is being used today. So yes, you have a phone system. Yes, it has lots of features, but gather as much intelligence as you can out of it. So look at the config, look at the bill, look at who the active users are versus the enabled users. That will give you an interesting scope of how big your use case is for real telephony, who's using which features potentially. If you can, for example, pull out all the people that have esoteric features configured and survey them, see how many of them are using that features. You'll probably be surprised how little that is used and how much the config is stale. The bill is great because immediately you can pull out your power users, like who's really smashing the phones. Obviously the bill tends to be the calls you're paying for, not necessarily your inbound calls. So if you can gather more intelligence there, that's really useful. When you're moving to team telephony, I'd really recommend starting with an easy group. Don't start with the senior leadership team, don't start with the CEO. You'd be surprised, or maybe unsurprised, seeing some of the faces on this session, like how often this project turns into, it's the exciting project, so let's put the most important people in the business on first. Just don't do it if you can help it, because you're testing them with your most important, most vocal users. So try and ramp out to IT or a smaller office first, get a feel for it if you can. Basic network readiness testing, super important. Make sure your ports and protocols are open. Make sure you're breaking out locally where you can, because for quality reasons, watch your firewalls and your proxies with media. If you can, again, if you're phasing and you know you've done meetings as a first workload, you'll have a much better idea of how your network's going to handle media for telephony. But do bear in mind, lots of organizations have a higher bar for telephony than they do for meetings. So if telephony has been on a dedicated VLAN with Cisco IP phones and it always works, it's always perfect, if that's the business bar for telephony, think carefully about just throwing this out over the internet directly before understanding, is your network ready for that? Is your internet connectivity ready for that? Are your firewalls ready for that? When you're rolling out, watch for delay in Office 365 license enablement. That can be really tricky. So timing these rollouts between an old phone system and new phone system, when you light up features in Office 365, it can take up to 24 hours from clicking the button to the feature to sync out. And there's not much you can do about that, really. Microsoft won't even really entertain a ticket until after 24 hours. So if you're rolling out, try and roll out on a Friday. Try and give yourself the weekend to sync out if you can. That's really, really useful. Deployment and your moves, adds and changes are all Teams Admin Center or PowerShell. PowerShell is great for consistency, it's great for click and done, it's great for prepping. So I'd recommend PowerShell where you can, just for consistency's sake. Also the Teams Admin Center, it can get a bit complicated if you're doing big migrations, so scripting is great, but you can do this stuff through TAC if you want. And unfortunately the PowerShell isn't at 100% coverage, particularly on things like calling plans, so there's some things you will have to do in the Teams Admin Center. As you're up and running, it's really important to understand who's using it, how are they using it, what are they using. Teams Admin Center has some great reports. The Office 365 portal now includes a minute usage report. This call quality dashboard has some Power BI usage reports as well. And of course, you can look at your Teams billing or call log. So do make sure that just because you've rolled out and enabled the feature, if nobody's using it, if everybody flipped a mobile because they didn't understand how to make a call in Teams, that's not a successful project. So ideally, you'll have known what your usage was before you flipped over. You should be seeing the same type of usage. Don't be surprised in a drop, because often people were dialing into meetings or using their phone to make one-to-one calls, and now they flip to either using VoIP, which obviously you can report on, or they flip to just scheduling meetings. So meeting traffic might go up as they get their headset and they get used to Teams more. But if your PSTN usage has dropped off a cliff, odds are everybody's flipped to mobile for some reason. And again, if you can, if you're a bit more advanced, if you've got insight into corporate mobiles, you can watch, because ideally we should be ramping down the minutes of usage on those, because people have nice headsets and a good user experience. They don't need to reach for their mobile quite so often. And quality, the most important thing before we get into the kind of more business conversation. Teams Admin Center has some reports around direct routing, errors and issues. Call quality dashboard, I'll keep saying this, it's a great thing, particularly the Power BI reports. Spend some time in there working around those reports. If you're not comfortable with this, that's the kind of thing a partner can do an excellent job on, is looking at this on your behalf, making sense of it, highlighting issues around networks and quality and Wi-Fi and those kind of things. Again, telephony, there tends to be a higher bar in people's expectation of quality. So make sure you've got that covered and make sure you understand what the business expects in terms of quality. So I spent, after saying that the business objective is the most important thing, I've spent a lot of time talking about more techie decisions. Hopefully I've layered through there some important decision points, but this is the most important thing, the business objectives. So know the reason why you're moving to Teams telephony, and have this documented and have it agreed, ideally with some kind of sponsor. Are you trying to save money? Are you reducing operational costs, getting rid of your existing PBX? You're moving to an evergreen platform, so this is your last big move for telephony. You know, no more big call manager upgrades. This is it now. If you've got E5, you've already probably paid for the license, so you're driving value out of that existing investment. I mean, that's really important at current economic stance, the state of the world at the moment. Like, it's going to be anything that's saving the business money is going to be important. You're using soft phones, so you're making people more agile, but you're also reducing hardware cost and maintenance cost. And longer term, as you decom PBXs, you get off Skype for Business, less IT platforms to support, less users to train. If you understand how to do Teams telephony, you probably understand how to do Teams meetings and vice versa. So there's lots of real hard ROI savings to be had around Teams. If you're moving from Skype for Business to Teams telephony, you might well have leveraged some of those ROIs already, you know, the big move to soft phones or the big move off of internal Psdn calling site to site, that kind of thing. So it can be harder ROI wise to justify SFB to Teams, but probably if you're running Skype for Business server, you're maintaining, patching, monitoring servers, you need to do an upgrade to the latest version at some point. So spend a bit of time on the non-technical why, the maths, the business value. Also, there's the productivity angle. So single client, work from anywhere. Remote working is obviously super hot at the moment. Lee and I were just saying before the call, like, there's been a big pop in interest in Teams telephony as everybody's had to be forced to work from home, all those IP phones on desks gathering dust, and those companies that were agile in this space have definitely benefited. And change is always hard. Even easy change from an IT point of view is hard for end users. So the Who Moved My Cheese is an interesting book about that. But have your business reasons ready. When people say, I don't like it because I liked the green and blue buttons on my phone and you've given me a phone without those buttons, or I used to like the way this thing worked or that thing worked. If you can roll out, yeah, but the business wants to be more competitive, more agile, work from home, this is going to save us hundreds, tens of thousands a year. I've got, you know, the senior leadership team want the business to move in that direction. Those kind of things can help you educate people as to why you're putting them through this change and what the upside is for them. So last slide, keys to success. Again, I've covered a lot in this session. I really hope it's been useful, but kind of some of my key takeaways. Know your reason why you're moving. Have a business case, have a justification. That doesn't have to be War and Peace, but have it agreed with the business, the organization, that this is our objectives. We said in our prospectus, we want to be digitally transformed and more agile. This is a key part of that story. Communicate to the users, so important and so neglected. Here's what's happening, here's why it's happening, here's the upside to you. Ultimately, end users don't care about the business, you know, saving money if it impacts their personal workflow. People care about what they care about and what their manager cares about. So there's lots of content out there on change management and things like that, but communicate with the users to why you're doing it and what the upside for them is. If you can get exec sponsorship for telephony projects, that's going to make your life much easier. Leverage the existing data you've got, the PBX bill, anything out of Skype server, if you've got a Skype server around usage, get a feel for how you're going to migrate. Certified device, and don't cheap out on devices. You'll end up buying twice if you go non-certified or you go cheap. If you're doing SBCs or SBAs, know why you're doing it. Again, have a documented use case. You can interrupt with your existing PBX with your own session border controller, but how many calls are really going to happen between your PBX and your Teams users? You could just put them on the PSTN network, for example. So if you're buying, maintaining, looking after that box, or having a partner look after it, know why you're doing that. In terms of business positioning, Teams is a collaboration platform with telephony. So I wouldn't go telephony as your first workload and then do collaboration later, I would say the benefit is this is a synergistic platform. And if you can phase your project, don't do 100,000 users at once. I mean, many businesses have had to because of world events, but it does add pressure and complexity. If you can phase, then you're going to learn as you go and not have everybody at once. And again, don't move the execs straight away. So that's it in a nutshell. Hopefully that's been useful. I mean, that's certainly what I've found is really, really important in projects. I really appreciate you coming to the session. Lee, I don't know if we had any questions as we went or what the format is on hanging around, but blogs there and links are there, so thank you.